766, here we go. Thank you. Won't you be seated? Be a good idea to take notes. I bet you won't remember it if you don't. This is to make up for all that you didn't get taught in high school. This is the crash course. The title of my address is The Betrayal of the Common People by the Power Elite in the 20th Century. Today we celebrate the 215th anniversary of our independence as a nation. Imagine what would happen if we brought back the men of the Second Continental Congress and played for them video highlights of all that has happened since they signed that Declaration of Independence. When they signed that document, they were publicly committing treason, and the British would have hanged them if they could have caught them. The signers had to stick together to survive. Ben Franklin quipped, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." If we brought them back, they would have much to be proud of. The United States of America has provided more freedom to more people than any nation on earth. This freedom has enabled our people to innovate and prosper. America is the most charitable nation upon earth. America willingly sent its youth over there to fight World War I and the war to end all wars, and then to fight Hitler's tyranny in World War II. Following World War II, we helped heal the wounds of our enemies and brought prosperity and democracy to Germany and Japan. America is a universal symbol of hope and opportunity. Angry men who demonstrate against America in front of our embassies in third world countries can't wait to get their green cards so they can emigrate here. America stands for all that is good and honest and just. Watching those video highlights, the men who approved the Declaration of Independence would see their struggle for freedom culminate in the framing of the Constitution and adoption of the Bill of Rights. They would see how Abraham Lincoln drew sustenance from the Declaration as he fought to save the Union. In 1861, he said, "I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence." Those who signed the Declaration had a vision of a free, self-governing society. They hoped their great experiment in freedom would spread throughout the world and inaugurate a new order of the ages. They had the revolutionary idea that government should protect certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They saw these rights as belonging to each person, regardless of his rank or station, simply because God had given them to him. Those who framed the Constitution created a government designed to guarantee those rights. Our founding fathers realized that life in America was far from perfect, but they sought to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. The American Republic had a rapid ascent. After a rocky start in the War of 1812 and the Civil War, the United States developed her natural resources and industrial power. She soon became the biggest economic power in the world. She used her industrial might to win both World War I and World War II. By the end of World War II, American military and economic power were so great, American prestige so high, that we had unprecedented power to act for the common good on the world stage. Some call the 20th century the American century. This was the moment of victory, the moment that was to be Saint Germain's springboard into the Aquarian age. At that moment, we could have won the world to the heart of Uncle Sam and done it right, but we didn't. Throughout the 20th century, American leaders have abused their power and betrayed the principles on which America was founded. Alongside the record of American acts of goodness, there is an unmistakable record of infamy. It is my purpose this day, July 4th, 1991, to look at that record of infamy and then to determine what you and I and the light bearers of the world who share that common light can do about it. Let's start where we left off, with Operation Desert Storm. It was a masterpiece of military strategy. The coalition of U.S., European, and Arab forces fought brilliantly. They quickly achieved their objectives with a minimum loss of life. They put an end to Iraq's occupation of Kuwait and brought to a close one of the most brutal chapters in modern history. Or did they? Desert Storm inaugurated a new chapter of human suffering even more brutal than the one that preceded it. Gone is the euphoria of quick victory on the battlefield. Gone are the images of American soldiers liberating Kuwait. They've been replaced by haunting images of Kurdish men and women driven in terror to the mountains by helicopter gunships, weeping over their dead children. Once we saw images of Iraqi soldiers grateful to be free from Saddam Hussein, kissing the hands of their American captors. Then we saw images of Shiite Muslims desperate. They told us that if the United States left Iraq, they would all be killed by Saddam Hussein's army. Shipping 10,000 of them off to Saudi Arabia was a temporary solution. The United States pulled its troops out of southern Iraq on May 9. Iraqi troops have surrounded hundreds of thousands of Shiites hiding out in the southern Iraqi swamps. We wondered just when Saddam Hussein would move against them. On July 3, ABC News reported that Saddam Hussein's army has begun shelling about 100,000 Shiites trapped in the swamp. As we celebrate our Declaration of Independence, we have seen that our government does not see fit to help the Shiites celebrate their Declaration of Independence. On February 16, 1991, before the U.S. invaded Iraq and Kuwait, I warned, "We may win the war, but will we win the peace? Failure to do so will lead to more wars." The new cycle of violence began almost immediately. On February 27, the Iraqis agreed to a ceasefire after their army in Kuwait had been routed. But within 1 month, Saddam Hussein had crushed the democratic opposition to his rule and put down 2 uprisings, one by the Shiites in southern Iraq, the other by the Kurds in the north. Thousands of Shiites and Kurds were massacred by Saddam Hussein's troops. About 2 million Kurds, 11% of Iraq's 19 million people, were driven into exile. Never before had so many refugees fled their homeland so quickly to escape an oppressor. It's hard to grasp the magnitude of this forced march, the purpose of which was to wipe out or expatriate Iraqi Kurds. If what happened in Iraq were to happen here, 11% of the United States population, more than 26 million Americans, would be uprooted. That's like driving the entire population of Washington, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan into the mountains and plains of Canada on foot, without food, water, or shelter. Well, how did George Bush manage to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? The answer is, victory was not his intention. From the start, Bush had a very hard time articulating his objectives in a way that would marshal American support for the war. Over time, he managed to formulate a policy. On September 11, 1990, President Bush told a joint session of Congress that the goals of Operation Desert Storm were to liberate Kuwait and restore regional stability. But Bush's hidden agenda was to use Iraq and Kuwait to strengthen a, quote, new world order. Bush said, "Out of these troubled times, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world can prosper and live in harmony." Not many people actually understood Bush's new world order. It sounded like a rhetorical flourish from a president who had trouble with that vision thing. He didn't seem able to articulate a clear vision of the future by which to guide his present policies. The Shiites and the Kurds discovered firsthand what the New World Order is all about. They may not understand the logic of non-intervention and other intricacies of foreign policy, but they do understand that Bush's words, the pursuit of justice, the quest for peace, and freedom from the threat of terror, do not apply to them. The Kurds and the Shiites have been sacrificed on the altar of the New World Order. America, beware. We, the American people, supported the Persian Gulf War. It was a simple case of right and wrong. Saddam Hussein had committed an act of naked aggression. Kuwaitis were being tortured, raped, and murdered. Their country was being looted. The environment was being polluted. How many Americans would have supported Desert Storm had they known that at the end of the war, Saddam Hussein would still be in power and would turn his fury on the Iraqi people? Those same Iraqi people with whom President Bush had said, "We have no quarrel." And indeed, we don't. How many American soldiers knew they were fighting to create a new world order? How many even knew what a new world order was all about? What is the New World Order anyway? Bush says it's a world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle, a world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice, a world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. How dare he borrow the principles of freedom? How dare he mimic the words of Saint Germain and our founding fathers when he is a betrayer not only of these people but of the people of America? In reality, George Bush's New World Order is a modern and sophisticated grab for power by the Western political and financial elites. It forwards their goal of forming a one-world government, which they, of course, would control. I have defined and described the power elite in Chapter 1 of my book, The Astrology of the Four Horsemen. I urge you to read it and read it again. It tells you what you need to know so that we, the common people, we who share one common light, can unite and enter a new age with true freedom and true justice for all. Proponents of the New World Order hold out an Aquarian vision of men and nations living together in peace and harmony. Yes, that's their hook. But they deliver oppressive rule, and we are watching in disbelief just how oppressive that rule can be. Anyone who doesn't play their game, who opts for freedom or self-determination, soon finds out how deadly this New World Order can be. Just ask the Kurds. The formula for bringing about the New World Order is twofold. 1, managed conflict. 2, the U.S. and Soviet Union jointly negotiating the peace settlement. The Bush administration is trying to make the United Nations the enforcer of his New World Order. The Iraqi war, as you know, was fought under the authority of several UN resolutions. Here's the process of managed conflict in action. The power elites of East and West armed Iraq. The Soviet Union was Iraq's major weapons supplier. But the United States and its allies, France, Britain, and West Germany, also sold Iraq military equipment and technology. That was only the first step of managed conflict. The Soviets gave Iraq permission to invade Kuwait. Perhaps the Soviets even gave the Iraqis a little push in the right direction. Soviet military advisors helped Iraq plan the invasion. On July 17, 1990, just 2 weeks before the invasion, Soviet General Albert Makashov, an expert in surprise attacks, flew to Baghdad, probably to review the plan of attack. The U.S. State Department removed an important obstacle to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and thus the Persian Gulf War. They sent diplomatic signals even when the invasion was imminent that the U.S. would not use military force against Saddam Hussein if he invaded Kuwait. After he did, the Bush administration suddenly decided it had to kick Iraq out of Kuwait, and the Soviets suddenly decided that they were going to cooperate with the United States on resisting Iraqi aggression. They both decided they were going to work to solve this problem through the United Nations. The United States and the Soviet Union agreed on an arms embargo against Iraq immediately after the invasion of Kuwait. The Soviets promptly violated the embargo and sent large quantities of military supplies to Iraq right up until the start of the war. Apparently, the Bush administration did the same thing on a smaller scale. According to a report in the Financial Times, a respected London newspaper, the United States allowed U.S. firms to ship military equipment to Jordan when they knew that Jordan was transshipping arms to Iraq. When the war ended, the formal ceasefire agreement was worked out in the Security Council, where U.S. and Soviet cooperation is essential. After the combatants agreed to a ceasefire, the Soviet Union announced it would rearm Iraq. China and North Korea have reportedly started the process. The power elites of this world have used managed conflict for a long time. They create a problem, namely war, in order to impose a solution, namely a peace that gives them greater power and control, and in which they hold all the cards. Managed conflict is a dialectical process whereby the power elite sow the seeds of conflict at each successive peace. This results in ongoing conflict. This process will continue, mark you well, unless and until We, the common people of the United States of America and the world, stop it and them. It will continue until the power elite achieve their goal. And their goal is owning complete power and control over you and me and the peoples of planet Earth. The strategy is perpetual war for perpetual peace. So you deliberately start a war, and then you impose a peace. And then you impose a peace on the combatants that will lead to future conflict. When that conflict inevitably comes, you fight once again to restore peace, and the cycle continues. With each turn of the cycle, more power is in the hands of the power elite and less power in the hands of we, the people. It is important that we examine the history of managed conflict on the planet, because the people of our nation and the people of all nations today are not seeing the pattern. There is a definite pattern here, and that pattern is going on before our very eyes, and we are not looking at it. If we, the keepers of the flame, we who have been sent by Saint Germain and beloved Portia, can understand this scenario, can see the pattern, and can mark it, we can be the ones who ride as Paul Revere. We can sound the warning. We can show what is happening to our blessed earth. This we must do, therefore let us look at history. If we do not study history, we are doomed to repeat it. World War I was the war to end all wars. But as you know, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles sowed the seeds of World War II. German dissatisfaction with the treaty fueled the rise of the Nazi movement, leading to World War II. World War II is a classic example of managed conflict. The Nazi war machine was fueled, literally, by money and technology from American banks and corporations, the power elite, the internationalists with no real loyalty to Uncle Sam or to you and me. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil of New Jersey transferred to the German firm IG Farben the key technology needed to produce synthetic gasoline from coal. Germany had lots of coal but little oil. Without a fuel source, Hitler's tanks couldn't have gone anywhere. Standard Oil also gave IG Farben the money to develop the technology. Our government knew exactly what was happening. In 1933, the commercial attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin wrote to the State Department in Washington, D.C. In 2 years, Germany will be manufacturing enough oil and gas out of soft coal for a long war. Standard Oil is furnishing millions of dollars to help. The Germans produced synthetic oil and gasoline, put it in their tanks, and rolled across Europe. There are a few footnotes about World War II that should have been headlines. When the United States did enter the war, American boys were fighting Nazi soldiers who were using tanks produced by subsidiaries of General Motors and Ford. And they were being blown up by explosives produced almost entirely by cartels financed by American capital. Rockefeller, Morgan, Ford, and General Motors maintained their business relations with the Nazis during the entire period of World War II. International Telephone and Telegraph played both sides of the fence. ITT biographer Anthony Sampson wrote, while ITT Focke-Wulf planes were bombing Allied ships and ITT lines were passing information to German submarines, ITT direction finders were saving other U.S. ships from torpedoes. All the major combatants in World War II, Japan, Germany, Italy, the Soviet Union, and Britain, received economic assistance from American companies. That assistance helped them fight the war. The power elite create the problem. They offer a solution. They supply all sides. And guess who winds up with all the chips on their side of the table? That's what war is all about on this planet. Convince the common people they're fighting for eternal values. These are the values that come under the label of freedom and justice and the people's rights, rights that are inalienable because derived from their God. Convince them to shed their blood in defense of democracy, then manage the conflict and mop up for your power strongholds. That's what's really going on this planet, and that's what we, the people who intend to march victorious into the golden age of Aquarius, have to be willing to look at. And then we have to be willing to take the bull by the horns and slay it. Today, July 4th, 1991, while there is yet time, we, the common people who share one common light, must make the decision and write it in blood that the power elite are not going to control us or our planet any longer. How many more times are we, the common people of the world, going to fall for it? Well, we fell for it again in the Persian Gulf. The quote, peace is more unstable than the quote, war. And the area will be as unstable as the sands for years to come. George Bush's policy in Iraq doesn't make sense, militarily or politically, unless you view it in terms of the New World Order. It took us 6 months to get 500,000 men and 1 billion tons of equipment halfway around the world. Yet our president would not give the order to finish off Saddam Hussein and his Republican guards when, according to General Norman Schwarzkopf, there was nothing between us and Baghdad. Bush said that Saddam Hussein was another Hitler and warned, when Hitler's war ended, there were the Nuremberg trials. But Bush didn't go to Baghdad to get Saddam Hussein, nor did he demand that Saddam Hussein be tried for war crimes or for crimes against the environment as a condition of the ceasefire. Instead, Bush called a halt to the war and took actions that gave Saddam Hussein the best chance of staying in power. Whose side was George Bush really on? The Iraqi people's or Saddam Hussein's? 100 hours after the ground war began, the butcher of Baghdad was on the ropes. In Iraq, the opposition wanted to establish a democratic regime. The Shiites and the Kurds were in a strong position. They just needed a little help. In fact, a gesture of support might have been enough. David Hoffman of the Washington Post reports, major defections from the Iraqi military were in the offing in March of this year at the height of the Kurdish rebellion, but never materialized because the officers concluded that the United States would not back the uprising. Hoffman's story was based on a report by Peter Galbraith, author of a Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff report released on May 2, 1991. Galbraith, who traveled throughout Iraqi Kurdistan during the rebellion, wrote that several strategically located Iraqi military figures contacted the Iraqi opposition. As the Iraqi military figures contemplated bringing possibly decisive force to the side of the rebels, they looked for a sign that the sponsors of the rebellion had the support of the United States. No such signal was given. On the contrary, the public snub of Kurdish and other Iraqi opposition leaders was read as a clear indication the United States did not want the popular rebellion to succeed. Given the negative signals from Washington, the potential military defectors stayed on the fence. And while they did so, the anti-Saddam Hussein rebellion was crushed. That's because Saddam Hussein was part of the plan for a new world order, and democracy was not. The Soviets, our partner in the New World Order, had a big investment in Saddam Hussein. Even if he was expendable, they wanted Saddam Hussein's party, the Arab Ba'athist Socialist Party, to remain in power. The Soviets, after all, had spent 30 years molding the regime to their designs. Ties between the two nations are so close that Iraq is almost a Soviet satellite. The Saudis also had Bush's ear. They didn't want a democratic or Shiite regime in Baghdad. Democracy in Baghdad might start the people of Saudi Arabia thinking about democracy in Riyadh. And a Shiite regime in Baghdad might think about conquering Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis decided not to help oust Saddam Hussein either. Saddam Hussein is a secular Sunni military strongman. The Saudis needed a secular Sunni strongman to keep Iraq in line. If in the short run it turned out to be Saddam Hussein, well, that's life. New York Times columnist William Safire says that Bush had it in his power to help the Kurds. Of course he did. Safire thinks Bush either chickened out or was reminded by Moscow or Riyadh of secret pre-war understandings not to overturn Saddam Hussein. If you saw me on Larry King, I mentioned that I thought that William Safire was a prophet, and it is for this statement that I made that. I'm talking about prophets in the general sense of the word, where there are people in this nation and in many nations who have the real insight as to what is going on. Safire saw through the whole thing. And so he speculated that Bush either chickened out or was reminded by Moscow or Riyadh of secret pre-war understandings not to overturn Saddam Hussein. He's alluding to a possible agreement between Bush and Gorbachev and Saddam Hussein that the war would be fought, but Saddam Hussein would be kept in power. I believe, in fact, that that is exactly what happened. Whatever secret agreements were reached, it was the New World Order in action. According to a well-placed Washington source, Bush ordered General Norman Schwarzkopf to leave an escape route open for 5 Republican Guard divisions to escape from Kuwait. Those same divisions were recalled to Baghdad to protect Saddam Hussein and to crush rebellions in at least 100 cities. They escaped with 700 tanks and 1,400 pieces of artillery, and they turned those weapons on the Iraqi population, mercilessly killing thousands of civilians. If I hadn't already cried my eyes out and my heart out watching this on television, I would be weeping before you here tonight. So profoundly grieved am I over this situation. They crushed them with tanks, they burned them with napalm, they killed them with chemical weapons, they blew them up with heavy artillery just because George Bush would not give the order to do away with that Republican Guard or to capture them and to destroy their equipment, just because George Bush would not move in and save those people. Those Republican Guard units made it possible for Saddam Hussein to defeat the Shiites and the Kurds. Those are the common people who share the common light. These are the light bearers of Iraq, and America should have helped them. If those units had been destroyed, the Iraqi army would not have held together. We had them cut off. It would have been an easy matter for U.S. forces to finish them off. General Norman Schwarzkopf said, "It was literally about to become a battle of annihilation. Frankly, my recommendation had been, continue the march." Schwarzkopf said that with another 24 hours we could have inflicted terrible damage on them with air attacks. But Bush did not accept the recommendation of his commander in the field because that was not Bush's agenda. A ranking military man told me that the men planning the war were shocked when they heard about the ceasefire. But I can tell you they were not as shocked as the Shiites or the Kurds would be just weeks later. George Bush had exhorted the Iraqis to rise up against Saddam Hussein. We all heard him. On February 15, Bush had said that one way the war could end was for the Iraqi military and the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands, force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside and rejoin the family of peace-loving nations. Many Iraqis thought George Bush was their friend. The Iraqis had heard 2 messages that gave them the courage to tackle Saddam Hussein. The Pentagon had said repeatedly that the Iraqi army had been destroyed, and the President of the United States had called on the people of Iraq to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. In January, Bush signed secret orders authorizing the CIA to help the rebel factions in Iraq. The orders gave the CIA broad authority for clandestine action. The CIA financed, equipped, and helped recruit staff for a clandestine radio station called The Voice of Free Iraq. Broadcasting from Saudi Arabia, the Voice of Free Iraq urged the Iraqis, specifically the Kurds, to rise up against Saddam Hussein. "Rise," said the broadcasts in Kurdish and Arabic. "This is your moment. This time the Allies will not let you down." To many Iraqis, the message was clear. It was time for action. But two problems loomed large. The Republican Guard that Bush had allowed to escape was on the loose, and Bush suddenly articulated the doctrine of non-intervention. An inside source tells me that the golden rule of the New World Order is that borders cannot be changed by military force, only by negotiation. In the New World Order, of course, those negotiations will take place in the United Nations under the supervision of the United States and the Soviet Union. How can we expect this to work when the Soviets and their allies have consistently voted against the free peoples of the world? Bush said he didn't want the rebellion to split Iraq into three nations, a Kurdish state in the north, a Shiite state in the south, and a Sunni state around Baghdad. He argued that we need a strong Iraq to balance Iran, but this argument has little merit. The Kurds said they were not trying to get a separate homeland. They wanted to be part of a democratic Iraq. The borders of Iraq were arbitrarily drawn by the British after World War I. They made no more sense then than they do now. But Bush didn't care. He was sticking by his guns. He maintained that the territorial integrity of Iraq was more important than stopping the destruction of the Shiites or the Kurds. Well, what makes up the territorial integrity of a nation but the people themselves? Bush wrapped himself in the doctrine of non-intervention, but the United States had already intervened. We had blockaded, bombed, and occupied Iraq, killed 100,000 soldiers and tens of thousands of civilians, and called upon the Iraqi people to oust Saddam Hussein. If that's not intervention, then tell me what is. Then as soon as the little people of Iraq, our brothers and sisters, rose up to do exactly what Bush had told them to do, we turned our backs on them and let them face the wrath of Saddam Hussein alone. But this was not the first time the United States had betrayed the Kurds. As Bill Moyers said during his special report after the war, quote, "In the early 1970s, President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger armed the Kurdish guerrillas in their struggle for autonomy in Iraq. Oil was one of the reasons. America's oil-producing ally in the Gulf, the Shah of Iran, was threatened by neighboring Iraq. The American government hoped a civil war would distract Iraq from its larger ambitions in the region. An American congressional committee later found that Washington had never intended that the Kurds should win. Documents in the committee's possession clearly show that the President, Kissinger, and the Shah hoped that our clients, the Kurds, would not prevail. This policy was not imparted to our clients, who were encouraged to continue fighting. When Iran and Iraq reached a ceasefire in 1975, the U.S. no longer needed the Kurds in their rebellion. U.S. aid came to a sudden halt. The Kurds were abandoned and left to face the wrath of the man who was then Iraq's security chief, Saddam Hussein. A bloodbath followed. The New World Order isn't for the Kurds. The Kurds are not Kuwaitis. They don't control the oil, nor do they have tens of billions of petrodollars in power elite banks. The Kurds also have a bad habit of fighting for their freedom, which is disruptive to the architects of a new world order. Yes, the freedom fighters of the world are no part of George Bush's new world order. People who want freedom are not easy to control. That's one reason the power elite is quick to work with dictators and slow to help anyone who fights for freedom, whether in Tibet, Tiananmen Square, or Afghanistan. The power elite gives the freedom fighters just enough help to let them bleed, but not enough to let them win. When the Iraqi army conducted wholesale murder, rape, and torture in Kuwait, Bush said he was outraged. But when those same troops did the same thing in Iraq, Bush said he didn't want to get involved in an internal conflict. shades of Cain. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are, George Bush. If you are the president of we, the people of the United States of America, then you are our brother's keeper, and we are putting you on notice today that you are. The United States of America has a moral obligation to intervene to protect human life anywhere in the world where life is threatened. When Saddam Hussein massacred the Kurds with helicopter gunships, Bush didn't let U.S. forces shoot them down. We could have done so without the loss of a single American life. We didn't even give the Kurds Stinger missiles so they could shoot down the gunships themselves. With Stingers, the Kurds would have had a chance. Ask the Soviets what Stingers did to their helicopters in Afghanistan. When terrified Kurds fled to Iran and Turkey, Bush was gone fishing. When the administration was finally forced by public opinion to take action on the refugee problem, the president dispatched James Baker to see what was happening firsthand. As if the evening news didn't tell it all, Baker spent exactly 7 minutes in a mountain refugee camp. He later said, "The United States does not feel responsible in any way for the Kurds. Shame on you, James Baker." I don't believe for 1 minute that this administration cares about the principles of non-intervention in another nation's internal affairs. They intervene when they decide to intervene, when it suits them and their New World Order. If we were to ask a member of the Bush administration why we didn't go after Saddam Hussein, he would probably answer, "Well, we do not invade a nation just to get rid of a dictator." Unless, of course, that nation is Panama, and that dictator is Manuel Noriega. Saddam Hussein makes Noriega look like an altar boy. When Saddam Hussein's henchmen were hanging Shiites from the gun barrels of their tanks, Bush refused to come to their aid. When Kurds were being chased by helicopter gunships, Bush refused to intervene. Iraqi helicopters flew 100 sorties against the Kurds in a single 24-hour period. We didn't want to get sucked into a messy internal conflict, but the moment Bush realized he had a PR problem on his hands, the policy changed. Bush sent thousands of U.S. troops to occupy northern Iraq, just what he said he'd never do. They established safety zones to protect Kurdish refugee camps. That sounds suspiciously like intervention, doesn't it? Not only is it intervention, it is the first step toward partitioning Iraq. We also intervened by telling the Iraqis to get their troops away from those camps, or else. Iraq got the message. Their troops obeyed the U.S. command, just what they would have done if we had told them in the first place. Hands off the Shiites and the Kurds. Saddam Hussein himself doesn't like this part of the New World Order. On April 24, under pressure, he reached an agreement with Kurdish leaders on Kurdish autonomy. Most Kurds are justifiably skeptical about the agreement. Saddam Hussein has made and broken 3 autonomy pacts with the Kurds in 1966, 1970, and 1985. Each one ended in a frenzy of violence. Saddam Hussein repressed their rebellions, executed their leaders, and destroyed their villages. As soon as it is convenient, he will do it again. That is, as soon as U.S. troops leave and the media turns its cameras away. It's not clear how long Bush will intervene. The remaining coalition forces, including 1,200 American troops, are supposed to be withdrawn from northern Iraq by mid-July. But on June 24, White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater said Bush might send a new force of U.S. troops to Iraq to protect the Kurds. But then, knowing Bush, he might not. By leaving Saddam Hussein in power, Bush has rigged things so that stay or go, the New World Order advances. If U.S. forces stay, those forces become an occupying power on behalf of the New World Order. If they leave, there will be a new wave of instability, managed conflict, to be used by the New World Order to gain more control for the power elite. Let's face it, Bush doesn't care about the Kurds. He started the relief effort because it was politically expedient. But U.S. food and tents will not bring back those who died, nor will it help the Kurds to live their lives free from terror. As a result of the actions of George Bush and his men, James Baker, Brent Scowcroft, Richard Cheney, and Colin Powell, the United States will bear the blood of every murdered Kurd, Shiite, or any other Iraqi that we would not protect. The law is the law, and it will descend upon us. Since Noah, governments have been instituted to protect human life and punish murderers. After Noah left the ark, God said to him, "I will demand an account of every man's life from his fellow. He who sheds man's blood shall have his blood shed by man, for in the image of God man was made." Governments lose their reason for being when they no longer protect human life. The right to life is enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. But the United States of America no longer protects human life, whether it's life in the womb or the life of the Kurds. Bush failed to use U.S. power to protect the Shiites or Kurds. No, the Kurds are not Americans, but we have unleashed the forces of war on the Iraqi people. We have turned loose another Hitler on a defenseless populace, and therefore we are responsible. We, the people of the United States of America, have failed to challenge our leaders, and because we have remained silent, thereby signifying our consent, the judgment will come down upon our own heads. When our leadership orders American troops on the scene to do nothing to stop the carnage, that leadership is responsible, and every American citizen who remains silent is also responsible. Silence is consent in the law, and if we remain silent, if we do not protest, we will bear a portion of this horrendous karma. That's why I'm speaking, and that's why you're listening to me today, because we will not let this shame be upon our heads and upon the heads of our families and upon the American people. We will cry out to God for justice on behalf of these massacred peoples, and He will answer us. In the book of the prophet Habakkuk, God speaks to the Israelites. "Since you have plundered many nations, all who remain of the peoples will plunder you. For you have shed men's blood and ravished the country, the city, and all who live in it." Jeremiah pronounced the Lord's judgment upon the children of Israel. While Jerusalem was under siege, they had made a covenant before God to free all of their servants. They liberated the servants, but when the siege was lifted, they forced them back into subjection. Jeremiah said, "Therefore thus saith the Lord, ye have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty every one to his brother, and every man to his neighbor. Behold, I proclaim a liberty for you, saith the Lord, to the sword, to the pestilence, and to the famine, and I will make you to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And I will give those who have broken my covenant into the hand of their enemies, and into the hand of those who seek their life. And their dead bodies shall be for food unto the fowls of the heaven, and unto the beasts of the earth." There is a process known as karma dodging. It is practiced by the power elite when they are in positions of leadership. The law of karma states that when the leadership makes decisions that go against the laws of God without taking accountability for those decisions, and the people fail to challenge those decisions, the people will bear that karma. And that's where we are today. We are letting the power elite get away with murder in our names. George Bush doesn't care if Iraqis or Shiites or Kurds die. He cares about his new world order and his popularity. When Bush's approval ratings started to fall, the White House spin doctors began floating stories that Bush and his advisors were surprised by the violence in Iraq. How could they have been surprised? Brent Scowcroft, Bush's national security advisor, told David Brinkley, "We did anticipate that there would be a lot of chaos. Indeed, we had released supplies positioned at the various exits from Iraq." As New York Times columnist A.M. Rosenthal said, "It is part of Saddam Hussein's long-standing plan to kill or force out of Iraq all who belong to any town, village, family, clan, or ethnic or religious group that ever opposed him." For years before the war, he drove at least 1.5 million Kurds from their homes into exile, abroad, or in internal exile in 104 camps. End of the Rosenthal quote. The Bush administration saw Saddam Hussein's capacity for violence in 1988 when he killed 5,000 Kurds with poison gas. Now, says Rosenthal, Saddam is seizing the opportunity given to him by the coalition decision to turn its back on the Kurdish and Shiite rebels. He is carrying out his own version of the final solution. Suddenly, two dates of unutterable sorrow cannot be shoved out of mind. On April 19, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto rose against the Germans. The world knew. No help came to the Jews of the ghetto. In the weeks of their revolt, they died by the thousands. At their leisure, the Germans then slaughtered the survivors. On August 1, 1944, the Polish underground responded to appeals from Moscow radio and also rose against the Germans in Warsaw, or what was left of it. The Red Army watched from across the Vistula, which runs through the city, but it never helped the Poles. After the uprising was wiped out, the Red Army did cross to install communist Poles in power. Rosenthal asks, how far is the Vistula from the Euphrates? On March 28, 1991, United States troops in Iraq watched while Saddam Hussein's Soviet-built helicopters, left in his hands by American decision, strafed and shelled Iraqi civilians less than a mile away. The Americans were ordered not to fire on the helicopters. Later, grieving, the American soldiers gave food and water to the survivors who managed to stumble across the fields to them. I cannot imagine a situation of greater heartbreak in our time. The tragedy of the Kurds was entirely unnecessary. It would not have happened if we had finished the job we started with Desert Storm. But we didn't seize Saddam Hussein, dismantle his socialist government, army, and secret police, and help Iraq down the road to democracy. Nor did we destroy Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons capability. And that was one of our major objectives. Prior to the war, the press carried informed speculation that Iraq had dispersed its nuclear, chemical, and biological facilities after Israel bombed their French-built nuclear reactor in 1981. Some of the facilities were said to be hidden underground. It turned out that the speculation was true. Sometime in May of 1991, a man calling himself Saddam Hussein's top nuclear scientist defected and told U.S. intelligence that some of Iraq's nuclear facilities had not been attacked during the war. U.S. intelligence didn't even know they existed. The defector revealed that Iraq was capable of making a nuclear weapon and had enough weapons-grade uranium to make at least one warhead or bomb. A Washington official familiar with the defectors' revelations said, "We didn't touch Saddam's nuclear weapons program. He's still in business." Bush may well order airstrikes to destroy those facilities, but it's unlikely that we can knock out all of Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons production facilities with air power alone. To be sure we do the job right, we will have to send people in on the ground. We only have 50,000 troops left in the Persian Gulf. Suppose Iraq resists. What are we going to do? Bring our troops back so that we have the strength we need to go in? That's something no one is looking forward to. But consider the alternative. Saddam Hussein gets the bomb and a long-range missile to deliver it. If that should happen, we can thank the Reagan and Bush administrations for greatly assisting Iraq's ballistic missile program and for failing to destroy Iraq's nuclear capability. An investigation by Nightline and the Financial Times of London revealed that the Reagan and Bush administrations covertly helped finance Iraq's weapons program. They did it through a fraudulent financing scheme run on Iraq's behalf by the Atlanta branch of an Italian bank known as BNL. In 1987, when Iraq was broke and no one would lend them money, BNL illegally raised billions of dollars in loans. At that time, the United States Department of Agriculture gave Iraq billions in credit through the Commodity Credit Corporation, or CCC. Iraq was supposed to use the government-guaranteed credit to buy American-grown food. But working with BNL, Iraq used the CCC credit to buy raw materials for chemical weapons, solid fuel for rockets, and precision machine tools that could have been used to upgrade the Scuds and further Iraq's Condor II missile program. And the Bush and Reagan White Houses almost certainly knew exactly what Iraq was doing. The Condor II is an intermediate-range missile. Before the war, it was nearly operational. With experience building the Condor II, Iraq might be able to build a long-range missile. Starting in 1984, the CIA allowed the illegal shipment of sophisticated missile technology and equipment, such as gyroscopes for guidance systems, from ICS, a Pennsylvania firm, to South Africa. This took place over a 4-year period, even though the CIA knew that South Africa, in turn, resold the technology and equipment to Iraq for the Condor II program. Not only have we betrayed the Kurds, but we have betrayed every nation within range of Saddam Hussein's missiles. Can you tell me for whom the New World Order is designed? Who is the New World Order for? Well, it's not for the Kurds or the Iraqis. It's not for the Lithuanians either. After World War II, the United States betrayed the Lithuanians in the same way we are betraying the Kurds today. As Lithuanian President Landsbergis recently wrote, following the Second World War, Lithuania's armed resistance against the Second Soviet occupation continued for about 10 years. At that time, U.S. radio stations raised the hopes of the resistance and all the people of Lithuania that the Soviets would soon be forced to withdraw. But in reality, the U.S. government maintained the position of neutrality even during the terrible years of 1948 and 49. This was when hundreds of thousands of Lithuanians were being deported to Siberia in cattle cars. Yet right at this time, U.S. radio station raised the hopes of the resistance and all of the people of Lithuania. They raised their hopes that the Soviets would soon be forced to withdraw by the United States. It's the same old routine. We encourage them to rise up, and then we never arrive on the scene when they need the help to finish the job. President Truman showed token support for the Baltics, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. After World War II, he refused to recognize Soviet control of the Baltics. But ever since, American presidents have acted as if the Baltics are an integral part of the Soviet Union. This policy goes back to the Tehran Conference of November 28 to December 1, 1943. During the conference, Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill made plans for war against Germany. Historian Robert Nisbet says that during the talks, Roosevelt raised the question of the Baltic states with Stalin. Official minutes of the private meetings between Roosevelt and Stalin, taken down by Roosevelt's translator, reveal the following. President Roosevelt told Stalin that he fully realized that Russia had a sovereignty over the Baltic states in the past. Roosevelt added jokingly that when the Soviet armies reoccupied these areas, he did not intend to go to war with the Soviet Union on this point. President Roosevelt gave Joseph Stalin a carte blanche to take the Baltics. George Bush has not altered Roosevelt's policy. On March 11, 1990, Lithuania declared her independence from the Soviet Union. The United States Senate voted 93-0 for President Bush to consider recognizing Lithuania. Bush didn't consider it. Freedom and democracy for the Baltics are not part of his New World Order. On January 13, the Soviet tanks and paratroopers unleashed a bloody crackdown in Vilnius, Lithuania's capital. It was followed by crackdowns in Latvia and Estonia. The Soviets had waited to attack until all eyes were riveted on the Gulf. The Bush administration didn't care if the Soviets used military force to block Lithuanian independence. Why not? We have good reason to ask why not. The Soviets had deprived small, helpless states of their sovereignty, exactly as Iraq had done to Kuwait. But there were differences between Soviet aggression and Iraqi aggression. Mikhail Gorbachev had won the Nobel Peace Prize. Saddam Hussein had not. The Soviets are our partner in the New World Order. Iraq is an unwitting player in the game. We could challenge Iraqi aggression because we have more military power than they do. We can't challenge Soviet aggression because we are not prepared to meet their military might. George Bush didn't see the Soviet crackdown as aggression. He wears a peculiar kind of eyeglasses. He saw it simply as a political problem that could jeopardize the ratification of arms control agreements. We, the common people who share one common light, must hang together, or we will all hang separately. Unless we unite, they'll pick us off one by one. We can't let ourselves be divided and conquered, American and Kurd, Lithuanian and Pole, again and again and again. The Jews hang together through thick and thin. Their sense of community transcends their social and financial classes and place of origin. The Israelis just whisked the Ethiopian Jews off to Israel and rescued them from a violent civil war. There is a Jewish brotherhood. There is also an Islamic brotherhood. Jews, Muslims, and Christians are all descendants of Abraham. But where is the Christian brotherhood? We are a people of one common light. It's the light of our living Savior, Jesus Christ. But we don't recognize that all our strength is in our union. We have to stick together nation by nation to beat this power elite and their New World Order. Bush's New World Order is nothing new. The abandonment of the Kurds should have been predictable. It had all happened before. The time, 1956. The place, Hungary. The modus operandi, an American president exhorts an oppressed people to throw off its oppressor. President Eisenhower publicly urged the Hungarians to rise up and throw off their oppressors. The Hungarians believed the United States would help them. The 1952 Republican Party platform promised to repudiate all commitments contained in secret understandings such as those of Yalta, which aid communist enslavements. In his first speech as Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles told the peoples of the Soviet satellites, "You can count on us." But they couldn't. The Soviets crushed the Hungarians, just as Saddam Hussein is crushing the Shiites and the Kurds today. And the United States did not lift one finger to help those Hungarians. Who is the New World Order for? Well, now we know it's not for the Hungarians. It's not for the Shiites and the Kurds either. It's not for the Cubans. At the Bay of Pigs, Cuban resistance fighters participated in a failed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro. The attack was encouraged and planned by the U.S. government and the CIA. The Bay of Pigs was a fiasco. Perhaps it was a planned fiasco. It's not clear that the U.S. really tried to oust Castro. Castro had toppled the Batista regime on January 1, 1959. I remember it well. The Eisenhower administration gave Cuban dictator Batista weapons to fight Castro. But through the CIA, it also secretly gave funds to Castro to fight Batista. John Kennedy then inherited a plan from Eisenhower and the CIA to use 1,400 exiles to liberate Cuba. On April 17, 1960, the exiles landed on the beach at the Bay of Pigs. The operation failed within 2 days. Most of the exiles were taken captive. The swift failure of the operation has been attributed to a series of blunders. The planned air support never arrived. The CIA gave the invaders the wrong kind of ammunition. The CIA failed to tell the Cuban underground resistance that the invasion was underway. As the 1,200 Cuban exiles lay on the beach, pinned down by Cuban forces, they saw American destroyers steam toward them. A rescue was underway, they thought. But then the destroyers inexplicably circled and steamed away. Finally, the exiles realized that they were being abandoned. As they watched the ships retreat, the exiles cried out, "In the wake of that ship goes 200 years of infamy." But were those CIA blunders really blunders? Or was it another case of managed conflict? You and I may never know, but it follows the pattern of other betrayals in this century. The Bay of Pigs fiasco led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, something that is supposed to have been a victory for the U.S. In a way it was. But in exchange for the Soviet Union removing its missiles from Cuba, President Kennedy secretly agreed that the United States would not invade the island. Kennedy made a second secret concession. He agreed to remove U.S. Jupiter missiles from Turkey. There was no quid pro quo, something for something. The consequences of Kennedy's promise not to invade Cuba, which has been honored by every subsequent administration, are too numerous to list. Castro has persecuted the Cuban people, been a key player in the drug trade, and exported terrorism and revolution throughout this hemisphere. Now, in violation of the INF Treaty and the agreement made during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Castro may have several Soviet-made SS-20 mobile missiles, right in our own backyard. Roland Evans and Robert Novak reported that on April 25, a U.S. spy satellite spotted one, maybe several, of the missiles in Cuba. The White House has denied the missiles are there, but Evans and Novak are sticking to their story, which they say comes from high-level intelligence contacts. Georgianne Geyer, author of Guerrilla Prince, The Untold Story of Fidel Castro, says, "I have no first-hand information about the SS-20s, but when people ask me what I think Castro will do if he's going down, I say he won't go quietly into the night. He is a violent, apocalyptic man." Well, tell me, who is the New World Order for? Well, it's not for the Cubans, and it's not for the people of Taiwan. It's not for the Chinese either. In 1945, at the end of World War II, China was in the midst of a civil war. The nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek outnumbered the communist forces led by Mao Zedong 5-1. Yet by 1949, the nationalists were forced to retreat to Taiwan, and Mao controlled the mainland. How did it happen? The United States government appeared to support the nationalists, but in reality it undermined their position. In 1945, General George C. Marshall forced Chiang to declare a truce with Mao and form a coalition government with the communists. In order to show his good faith, Chiang agreed to the truce and deactivated 180 of his 300 divisions. In March 1946, the communists broke the truce by pouring troops into Manchuria. The United States blamed Chiang for the incident and placed an embargo on U.S. arms. That was the turning point in the Civil War. Thereafter, Stalin gave Mao ample military support, but the United States gave the nationalists only token aid and continually undermined them. For example, under the embargo, the nationalists could not get gasoline for the Air Force we had given them. General Marshall equipped 33 of the nationalists' best divisions with American .30 caliber rifles. Then he embargoed .30 caliber ammunition. That was not the final betrayal of Taiwan or China. On October 25, 1971, the United States failed to block the seating of the People's Republic of China in the United Nations and the expulsion of nationalist China on Taiwan. On December 15, 1976, President Carter announced that the United States was going to sever diplomatic relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan and establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. He also terminated our mutual defense treaty with Taiwan, which was signed in 1954. That endangered Taiwan since Beijing had never renounced the use of force to recover Taiwan. However, Congress did not completely approve of Carter's actions. In April 1979, Congress passed legislation which promised to provide the arms needed for Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability. But on August 17, 1982, the United States signed a joint communique with Beijing, pledging to gradually reduce arms sales to Taiwan, leading, quote, over a period of time to a final resolution of the reunification of Taiwan with the mainland. When we betrayed Chiang Kai-shek in China, he retreated to Taiwan. There he set up a democracy, a free enterprise system, and a free market. The people of Taiwan today are industrious and free and light bearers. This is what could have happened to the entire mainland China. Instead, today, the Soviet Union has a strong ally in China, and the communist Chinese rule with an iron hand and suppress its peoples and their freedom, as seen in Tiananmen Square. This was due to the betrayal of the United States government of Chiang Kai-shek. We should have moved in, joined him with our forces, and claimed the entire land of China and the people of China for the flame of freedom which they deserve. And so the history of the United States government's infamy goes on. On June 4, 1989, the Chinese Communist Party ordered the army to crush student demonstrations in Tiananmen Square. What followed became known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre, but the United States did not allow it to influence its China policy. The murdered students were demonstrating for freedom and democracy. Who can forget the statue they made of the Goddess of Liberty? Some students had the words of the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address on their lips, yet President Bush did nothing to help them. The Bush administration pledged to cut off high-level diplomatic contacts with the Chinese, to protest the massacre, an extraordinarily weak gesture considering the nature of the crime and considering what America ought to stand for. Yet Bush violated his administration's own pledge and sent Brent Scowcroft, his national security advisor, to Beijing in both July and December of 1989. It was business as usual. In May of 1990, less than 1 year after the Chinese government's brutal crackdown in Tiananmen Square, President Bush renewed China's most favored nation trade status. China is busy selling ballistic missiles to the third world, making the earth even more dangerous. And China is almost certainly selling goods to the United States produced by prisoners in forced labor camps. That's against United States law. Americans might lose their jobs due to cheap imports made with cheap prison labor, but President Bush isn't concerned. Look at it this way. If you are a Chinese prisoner making shoes, your job is safe. George Bush is protecting it by giving your employer most favored nation status. Well, who do you think some of those prisoners are? They're the very students who demonstrated in Tiananmen Square. And so now we know, George Bush, your new world order is not for the students who demonstrated in Tiananmen Square. Whose side is the power elite on in Tibet? The White House has ignored China's October 1950 invasion of Tibet and its policy of cultural genocide. China did to Tibet on a grand scale what Iraq tried to do to Kuwait. Iraq paid a price for its invasion. The Chinese have never paid the price. Since 1950, the Chinese have killed more than 1.2 million Tibetans, roughly 20% of the population. When I would go to the altar and ask El Morya, "What prayers shall I offer on your behalf?" he would say to me, "Pray for my chelas in Tibet." These are our spiritual brothers and sisters, devout, pure, wonderful people under the Dalai Lama, and our government has totally ignored their plight. They are the devotees who practice the science of mantra and keep the holiness of the Lord Gautama Buddha. Our government has turned its back on them. This is the shame upon America, because we have yet to rise up in righteous indignation upon our leaders for betraying the common people of the world who share that common light. The Chinese communists set out to obliterate Tibetan Buddhist culture. They destroyed more than 6,000 monasteries and burned 60% of Tibet's philosophical, historic, and biographic literature. These were priceless teachings that should be in our hands in the West. Monks have been persecuted. Tibetans have been subjected to forced abortion and forced sterilization. So many Chinese have been resettled in Tibet that the Tibetans are now a minority in their own land. John Avedon, author of Tibet Today, writes, "A 2,000-year-old civilization was essentially destroyed in a mere 20 years. And do you know that the Dalai Lama visited the President in the White House on April 15 of this year? He was let in by a side door. There were no photo ops. The White House did not release a summary of the discussion, and the President gave him a measly 15 minutes. The Dalai Lama is the leader of our brothers and sisters, yet it's the first time he's ever been received in the White House. His treatment by President Bush is a shame upon us all. For 40 years, America has stood still and done nothing to defend the Tibetans against the communist Chinese. Do you hear any protest from the White House against the Tibetan massacre? No. The truth is that the men who have occupied the White House in this century don't care one whit about the spiritual people of this planet. They don't care about the people who are carrying and guarding the flame for the golden age of Aquarius and moving forward with the ancient cultures of the Buddha, of the Christ, and of all of the world's religions. These are the flame keepers of the world. They are the ones who keep civilization going. They are us. And the power elite is systematically snuffing us out because they know that if we don't keep that flame on earth, there will never be freedom again for the peoples of this planet. Their goal is total world domination, and we are in their way. The New World Order is not for the Tibetans. It's not for the Koreans either. During the Korean War, the United States did not liberate North Korea. We could have done so, and had General Douglas MacArthur had his way, we would have. Is the New World Order for the Afghans? The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan on December 27, 1979. The United States condemned the invasion but gave the Mujahideen almost no military support. In 1986, the United States finally gave the Mujahideen Stinger anti-aircraft missiles and other weapons. But it was too little, too late. By the time the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan on February 15, 1989, more than 1 million Afghans had been killed, and another 5 million had been driven into exile. Did you know that Padmasambhava, the great Buddha, was born in Afghanistan? The Afghans are also people of great light and great strength. They are freedom fighters, and they are not wanted by the New World Order. They don't count. Who else but the Afghans would or could fight the Soviets with their bare hands? Who else but Afghans can live an entire day on a cup of tea and a handful of rice and fight the Soviets? The Soviets seeded the country with bombs that looked like toys. The bombs crippled and maimed thousands of children. Clearly, they were earmarked for children. And the Americans stood by. The Afghans simply did not have the means to defend themselves for most of the war. The Soviets have now withdrawn from Afghanistan, but they have established a puppet regime in Kabul. They prop it up with $500 million worth of military equipment a month. The United States gives the Mujahideen a paltry $30 million in aid per month. Meanwhile, Soviet troops wearing Afghan uniforms are firing scuds at the Mujahideen. Mujahideen is the name of the Afghan freedom fighters. They fired more than 400 scuds in one battle alone against the Mujahideen. Saddam Hussein only fired 81 scuds during the entire Persian Gulf War. The United States has cut off the supply of Stingers to the Mujahideen. We give them just enough equipment to continue to fight and die, but not enough to overthrow the Kabul regime. This, my beloved brothers and sisters, is managed conflict. If nothing changes, they will be forced to negotiate with a communist regime in Kabul, no doubt under the direction of the US and the USSR. It will be another step forward for the New World Order, and a backward step for freedom and democracy. Well, now we know that the New World Order is not for the Afghans. Well, it's not for the Nicaraguans either. Whose side was the power elite on anyway in Nicaragua? The power elite didn't give the Contras the support they needed to overthrow the Sandinistas. They provided minimal funding to the Contras while the Soviets armed a 200,000-man Sandinista army. While Congress debated the merits of backing the Contras, the Sandinistas destroyed the Nicaraguan economy, harassed the Catholic Church, kidnapped, tortured, or executed 2,000 people, jailed 4,000 political prisoners, forcibly relocated 80,000 peasants and 10,000 Mosquito Indians, and drove 500,000 people into exile. When Violeta Chamorro was elected president of Nicaragua on February 25, 1990, it was an empty victory. The Sandinistas still run the country through the military. According to one foreign policy expert, Nicaragua is the laboratory for the New World Order. Nicaragua is an East-West conflict in a third world country where the US and the USSR imposed a negotiated settlement. In Nicaragua today, there is a veneer of democracy over totalitarian rule. Rah, 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 we got a PR victory. Chamorro, a Democrat, is a figurehead. But Humberto Ortega, a Sandinista, a communist, still runs the country. And the Soviets, through the Sandinistas, their own communist-picked military force, still run the country. Watch out, El Salvador. The New World Order isn't for you either. Watch out, people of North and South America. The New World Order isn't for you either. The New World Order isn't for the people of El Salvador, and it isn't for the people of Croatia and Slovenia either. On June 25, 1991, these two republics declared their independence from Yugoslavia. Their story will sound familiar. They are tired of living under oppressive communist government. They have democratically elected leaders, and as the President of Croatia explained in a June 24th letter to Secretary of State James Baker, they are committed to peace, freedom, and a free market economy. The United States has the opportunity to support the independence of two states committed to freedom and a voluntary confederation, or it can support the unity of repressive Yugoslavia. The Bush administration and the Soviet Union took positions that State Department spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler said were almost literally identical in favor of Yugoslavian unity. Frank Gaffney, director of the Center for Security Policy, said, "The common determination on the part of the Soviet Union and the United States to preserve the territorial integrity of such imperial accidents of history as Yugoslavia, to say nothing of the USSR and Iraq, under centralized totalitarian rule, is emerging as the ironic definition of the so-called New World Order." Yugoslavian tanks have rolled into Slovenia and Croatia to put an end to their independence. The Bush administration has been stung by criticism that it gave the Yugoslav military the green light to attack. Keepers of the flame, on this 215th anniversary of American independence, the Bush administration ought to redeem itself and announce that the United States recognizes the independence of Croatia and Slovenia. But don't hold your breath. The New World Order isn't for the Croatians or the Slovenians. Who then is the New World Order for? Do you think it's for the people of the United States? Well, I have something to tell you. It's not for the people of the United States either. It's not for you, and it's not for me. George Bush, if you want to know the truth, doesn't care if you or I die in a nuclear war. The truth of the matter is that George Bush cares for George Bush. Bush supports Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. Great. Many people believe it's designed to defend us against nuclear weapons. But SDI is not designed to deploy existing technology. It's designed to research future technology. And both Bush and Reagan have insisted that whatever it does must be confined to the 1972 ABM Treaty with the Soviet Union. This treaty limits our ability to have anti-ballistic missiles or a sound defense against the possibility of a nuclear first strike against the United States. This is the treaty we keep religiously with the Soviet Union, although they have broken that ABM treaty themselves many, many times. Thus, as defense analyst Angelo Codevilla writes, in exchange for 8 years and $24 billion, the SDI program has given us not a single usable device. The Gulf War demonstrated that strategic defense works. Strategic defense is defense against long-range weapons. The success of the Patriot missile in shooting down Iraqi Scuds shows that ABMs can be used to defend civilians. If the Patriot had been given its full capability, it could have destroyed Scud missiles much farther from their targets than it did. This would have saved the lives of those who were killed by falling debris. But the Ford and Carter administrations cut the range of the Patriot's radar so that it would comply with the 1972 ABM Treaty, a treaty the Soviets, as I said, have broken many, many times. The Patriot was deliberately crippled so it couldn't shoot down Soviet ICBMs. If the Patriot were linked to the Navy's Aegis radar, it could defend American cities from an ICBM attack. Such a system could be deployed today and could see a warhead-sized object 200 miles away. It could track hundreds of incoming warheads and shoot down over a dozen warheads within a few seconds. We could deploy a system of 500 Patriot Aegis mobile firing missiles around the United States. What would this mean for the average American? As Codavia writes, any individual within about 40 miles of such a unit could be confident that he would survive attacks of less than a dozen warheads aimed at his area simultaneously. This system would guarantee protection from an accidental launch, and it would dramatically reduce the chances of deliberate attack. Few Americans today doubt that Saddam Hussein would attack American cities with nuclear weapons if he had them. 7 nations currently have nuclear weapons: the United States, the Soviet Union, China, Great Britain, France, India, and Israel. 20 other nations could have nuclear weapons in the next decade. These include Libya, Pakistan, North Korea, Cuba, and Argentina. Are we willing, keepers of the flame, to bet our lives on the stability of these nations and the sanity of their leaders? No. The managers of the New World Order are willing to take that gamble in our names. They don't care if you die in a nuclear attack or an accidental launch from one of the lunatics that wind up at the top of the heap of third world nations. And that is the plain truth that you and I have to deal with. We can no longer remain in the euphoria of glasnost and perestroika, refusing to see what our government is not doing for our own citizens. When Gorbachev came to power on March 11, 1985, he led us to believe that the Soviets planned to redirect their resources from a military to a civilian economy. The Soviets actually convinced the West to lend them tens of billions of dollars, both Western banks and Western governments. So what's happened? Today, the Soviet civilian economy is in much worse shape than it was in 1985. Where did all the money go? Into the military, of course. The Soviets are increasing their defense budget. They now spend 40% of their GNP on the military, as Time magazine reported. Since 1985, the Soviets have built 16,500 tanks. What do they want to do with all those tanks? And get this, the SS-18 Mod 4 is the deadliest weapon system in the world. With their 308 Mod 4s, the Soviets can target all U.S. silo-based ICBMs and strategic submarine bases. They've got it all covered. Yet at great expense, the Soviets are replacing the Mod 4 with SS-18 Mod 5, which is bigger, more accurate, and deadlier. In addition, I've recently learned they're now developing the Mod 6. The Soviets are broke. Why are they spending a fortune on offensive weapons? It's obvious. The Soviets intend to solve their economic problems by invading Western Europe and simultaneously launching a first strike against the United States. The Soviets have a strategic and civil defense. That's because they believe it's possible to fight and win a nuclear war. Few today have any idea how fast the Soviet military power is waxing, and the U.S. military power is not only waning, it's disintegrating. You might wonder, how could that possibly be? We just defeated Soviet weapons and tactics in Iraq. The truth of the matter is we defeated some Soviet equipment. Very little of it was top of the line, which was operated by Iraqis, not Soviets, using no tactics at all. The Soviets use maneuver tactics like the ones we use. The Soviets have better equipment than the Iraqis and a lot more of it than we do. If we ever fight the Soviets, we won't have air superiority from day one, as we had when we fought Iraq. We won't have the leisure of taking 6 months to get our forces in place to fight. If we must fight in Europe, our naval transports will have to fight their way across the Atlantic, while our troops in the field try to hang on. Iraq was on the verge of getting one nuclear weapon. The Soviets are on the verge of gaining unchallengeable nuclear superiority. Remember those smart weapons you saw on TV that were so effective against Iraq? They would be pretty effective against the Soviets too, except for one thing. We used up large quantities of our smart weapons during the Persian Gulf War. It's going to take a long time to rebuild the inventories of smart weapons to pre-war levels. It might take 3 to 5 years before we have enough weapons stockpiled to mount another campaign similar to Desert Storm. And since we're in the process of cutting our defense budget and our military forces by 25%, it might take longer. The military, flushed with victory, is in disarray. Much can be attributed to budget problems. But even more can be attributed to the supposed end of the Cold War, which is really shorthand for, I hope and pray that the Soviets turn out to be good guys after all. Well, the Soviets are not the good guys. Not even George Bush's beloved Mikhail Gorbachev is a good guy. For years I've been saying that Gorbachev is running a protection racket. The basic threat is this: give us money to help reform our economy, or we'll use our military forces to take what we want. Of course, it's not said so bluntly. In May 1989, I summarized his pitch as follows. The Soviets say, Glasnost is a precarious undertaking that may or may not succeed. Yes, the Cold War is over, at least for now. But there are many reactionary forces in the Soviet Union who can resist change, and the Soviet economy is a disaster. If Glasnost and Perestroika are to change the Soviet economy from an inefficient, centrally controlled mess that emphasizes military production to a market economy designed to satisfy consumer wants, Gorbachev is going to need help. In short, if the Soviets don't get Western money, credit, and technology, the hardliners will take over and we'll be back in the days of superpower confrontation. So if you know what's good for you, you'll pay up. That's blackmail. And it's worked. The West has loaned the Soviets in excess of $40 billion since Gorbachev came to power. The Soviets have increased their defense spending in that time and let their civilian economy rot. Now, surprise, surprise, the Soviets want more money, and a lot more money. It seems like they'll settle for $150 to $250 billion over the next 5 years. And the threats are even more brazen. On June 5, 1991, Gorbachev issued a threat of war when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. He said, if Perestroika fails, the prospect of entering a new peaceful period in history will vanish, at least for the foreseeable future. The Soviet Union is entitled to expect large-scale support to ensure its success. End of Gorbachev quote. Well, Mikhail Gorbachev took a page out of Al Capone's book. Capone once said, you can get much farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone. After Gorbachev's acceptance speech, the light finally went on in a few prominent minds in the United States. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one accusing Gorbachev of blackmail. On June 9, on ABC's This Week with David Brinkley, Senator Bill Bradley called Gorbachev's statement an attempt at a new form of nuclear blackmail, Give us money or we won't be able to control our nuclear weapons. Just to make sure the message gets across, the Soviets keep a drumbeat of threatening messages. Edward Shevardnadze, the former foreign minister, constantly warns of the imminent threat of dictatorship and rule by hardliners in the Soviet Union. What is this newfound fear of dictatorship anyway? When did the Soviet Union become a democracy? When did it cease being a dictatorship? No one elected Mikhail Gorbachev. He now has more personal power than Joseph Stalin ever did. The Soviets like to project the image of Gorbachev as the sincere reformer who is as weak as tea politically and has to have Western aid to keep from being devoured by his right wing. In fact, not even Shevardnadze is concerned about a dictatorship. That's what the Soviets have had all along. And Shevardnadze's stormy resignation speech, in which he first warned of a dictatorship, was nothing more than a, quote, well-planned spectacle aimed at increasing Gorbachev's personal power. Those are the words of one Y. Blokhin, a senior deputy of the Supreme Soviet. We are being treated to political theater, the Soviet version of the good cop, bad cop routine. Shevardnadze is the good cop. His line, help us complete our democratic reforms. Colonel Viktor Alksnis, the so-called black colonel, is the bad cop. These are his words, spoken this year. The West is not aware of what a danger the Soviet Union poses for it now, even more than in Stalin's time. If civil war here is unavoidable, it will involve nuclear arms and weapons of mass destruction. Yes, we shall perish, but we shall take the world to the grave. You will perish with us. There will be no borders. The conflict will splash over them, first into neighboring countries, and then into a world catastrophe. When some people in the West rejoice at the collapse of the last empire, they are seriously mistaken. You ought to be interested in preserving the USSR and securing its internal stability. End of quote. It's possible that the Soviet Union could erupt in civil war, but it's more probable that the Soviets will launch a first strike. Colonel Alksnis's threat of civil war is a good fundraising appeal. You better help us for your own good. Gorbachev is portrayed as the guy caught in the middle. But in reality, his threat is that of a serial murderer. Help me before I kill again. Things are very bad in the Soviet Union, but not as bad as we are led to believe. We just extended the Soviet Union $1.5 billion in agricultural credits. That's George Bush. Many people have the idea that the Soviets are starving. Did you ever see a skinny Soviet in a food line? We see it night after night on TV, all these fat Soviets in line for food. There's no food in the meat market. They look pretty well fed to me. So what did the Soviets buy with the first allotment of credit? Did they buy wheat, corn? Did they buy food for their people? No. They bought feed grain for cattle. They didn't give it to the people because there's plenty of food available in the Soviet Union. It's not in state stores, but it's in private stores. It's often hard to get, but it's there. Any money we give the Soviets now will go right into their military. And you can take that from Saint Germain. What people have to realize is that the Soviets are going to keep high levels of military spending because they can use their military to extort funds from the West at will. Consider this. On March 11, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev writes to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. He informs him of a slight change in the deal Germany had made to get the Soviets to withdraw their 350,000 troops from bases in Germany. The original price was $8 billion. Gorbachev informed Kohl that it had now gone up to $22 billion. As the Center for the Security Policy wrote, the Soviet leader makes no effort to justify or explain this immense cost overrun, primarily because there is no financially sound explanation. He simply asserts it, evidently confident that the Germans will do what they are told in the face of Kremlin fear-mongering. Well, if our missiles were still in Germany, ready to defend Germany against a Soviet land war, Helmut Kohl wouldn't be so fast to accept Soviet demands. Toward this end, Gorbachev alludes menacingly to unidentified forces trying to shake the existence of the state and uncertainty over the Soviets' ability to retain control of the financial situation over the next 3 to 5 months. Gorbachev has designs on Germany and the rest of Western Europe. He wants to Finlandize them, that is, to make them like Finland. Finland is a politically subservient relationship to the Soviet Union. It is much like a vassal state. The Soviet Union can cause Finland to change its domestic or foreign policy by merely requesting it to do so. We have known for a long time that it was Gorbachev's goal to Finlandize Western Europe, but for the first time, Gorbachev let the secret slip. While traveling in Europe recently, Gorbachev told a journalist that the relationship between the Soviet Union and Finland shows what relations between the Soviet Union and Western Europe must be like. Realizing that he had been a little too open, Gorbachev hastily corrected himself to say, can be like.